Hey Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We do all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. We're going to be talking about Night Flyers, the George R. R. Martin sci-fi series on sci-fi, oddly enough. Another cool sci-fi series called Counterpart, which is on Starz, will be starting up next week. Those are all things we'll be talking about in the future. But now, we're going to do another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segment. And today's topic involves the Dwarven Rings of Power, and as it turns out, the Line of Durin. So, if you remember the poem that sums up the entire Lord of the Rings, you've got 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone. So what are those 7 rings? All right. Now, obviously, I did another video on the 3 rings, the elven rings. Take a look at that. Those are named. We know a lot of their powers, their backstories. Those were actually more powerful rings than the 7 dwarven rings. Partially because, or mainly because, the elves made those. They weren't really made with Sauron particularly involved. So they spent some extra time in it, and so short of the 1 ring of power, those 3 elven rings were probably like just below the 1 ring. Below that would be the 16 rings, 7 for the dwarves, 9 for the humans, who became Nazgul. Those rings of power. So we don't know a lot. They don't have names, or if they did, we don't know what they are. But we know there's 7 of them. We know they were given out as gifts by Sauron to all the different clans of dwarves. So there's, Durin's clan are the Longbeards. So there's the Longbeards, the Firebeards, the Stiffbeards. I can't remember them all, but one of them is the Iron Fists. So that's it's like Marvel superhero dwarves, the Iron Fists. But in any case, we can assume that basically the leaders of each of these groups accepted these rings from Sauron. It's a little interesting that Sauron was able to give them away. I believe at this time the dwarves would have known that he was, the enemy. So I wonder how he managed to convince the dwarves to take the rings. Perhaps, there's more than once where Sauron has disguised himself. And so perhaps he disguised himself in some way that allowed him to bestow these rings of power. But he gave them to the dwarves with the hopes of corrupting them, obviously, and turning them similar to the way that the humans, the Nazgul, did. Interestingly, the dwarves, unlike humans, much tougher to bend their will, their own sense of self, tough to corrupt in that way. And so the rings didn't really have the effect on them that as they did, say, on the humans. Also, the rings didn't turn the dwarves invisible. So there's some differences in terms of the effects of the rings on dwarves versus the effects of the rings on humans. Seems like it was not quite as effective. Now, the way it did work on the dwarves, however, is, first of all, the rings did increase their wealth. So if they had it, they were able to, all these mining operations went really successfully, but it also increased their greed. And so inevitably that would lead to these different civilizations' downfalls. And so in some ways that was the ultimate corrupting influence of these rings, was that these dwarven kingdoms all had this we're going up, hey, we're doing awesome, we're doing great, oh, and that was kind of the template for dwarven kingdoms for a while. We know that 4 of the 7 rings were destroyed by dragon fire. So I think what that means is that 4 of those kingdoms got enough treasure that they attracted a Smaug-like dragon to show up, burn everyone, including the wearer of the ring. If they burned the ring, they probably burned the guy wearing it. And then those dragons took the treasure that had been amassed by that particular kingdom. So 4 of the kingdoms fell that way to dragons. The other 3, eventually, Sauron retrieved the 3 rings. He ended up with 3 of the Dwarven Rings. And in fact, we'll jump ahead real fast. When it comes to right before the War of the Ring breaks out, a messenger from Sauron shows up at Dane Ironfoot's place. So basically back at Lonely Mountain, the Iron Hills, I'll say. But basically says, hey, we'll give you back these 3 Dwarven Rings. Sauron will give these back to you if you help us in finding the One Ring. We need to, basically sell out the hobbits and, we'll give you these rings back. Dane refuses the offer. It's kind of like, Sauron's with a bunch of orcs. This doesn't sound right to me. And that meeting basically in some ways spawns Glóin and Gimli to go to Rivendell for the Council of the Ring. It's kind of like, look, we had this weird thing happen to us. Sauron showed up and tried to give us rings to find this ring of power. We said no. But in any case, that's kind of where that arc of the rings went to. We can assume that when the One Ring was destroyed, those 3 rings probably lost all their power at that point as well. So, of those 3 rings that were not burned by dragonfire, we really only know a lot about one of them. And that particular ring belonged to the Longbeards, aka Durin's line. So, Durin, there's like Durin the First, Durin the Second, Durin the Third. During this time, there we go, great. They set up in Moria, right? So Khazad-dûm, that's Durin's kingdom. Durin's Bane, I did a video on the Balrogs. You can check that out. That's what they, their greed and wealth, the ring in some ways inspired them to keep digging until they hit the Balrog, and the Balrog, did horrible things and killed Durin, that particular Durin. So, that's where Durin's line is. They escape. They go to Erebor, Lonely Mountain, and this is where Thror. This is from the Hobbit movies. If you've seen the movies and read the books, Thror, his son is Thrain the Second. Thrain the Second's son is Thorin, and that's all in the line of Durin. So Thror, Thrain, Thorin. So Thror is obviously king under the mountain when Smaug shows up. Again, they got this problem with he's got the ring, and they amassed a bunch of wealth. So much wealth, Smaug took notice and just laid waste to everything. It's all happening in the Third Age. So 2770, I believe, is when this happened. So roughly 250 to 300 years before the War of the Ring, in that time frame. That's when Smaug shows up, devastates Erebor. They flee. Okay, so the dwarves have left under Thror. He's still got the ring. Thror, they settle, and they basically, it's the years of poverty for the dwarves. They're having a hard time. Life is bad. 20 years later, 2790, I believe, is the year of this happens. Thror comes one day to his son, his one son. He only had one son, Thrain. And he says, Thrain, here, I'm giving you my ring. I'm giving you the key to Moria. I'm giving you a map to find that keyhole. I'm going to go off and try to basically recapture some of the Dwarven glory and treasure. And so Thror sets off on his own, almost on his own. He's got one companion, and that guy's name is Nar. We don't know a lot about Nar, but he's incredibly important. So Nar, I guess he's a good friend of Thror's. I don't think he's in the line of succession or anything like that, but he's obviously Thror thinks enough of him to take him along on this journey of his. So Thror decides to return to Moria. And he shows up with Nar, and the gates, this is on the eastern side So not the speak friend and enter side, but the, where the Watcher in the Water is, but the other side, where Mirror is. And the gates are open. So Thror says, "Hey Nar, you wait here. I'm going to go in and check out Moria, see if I can find something and bring it back." He goes walking into Moria. Nar waits for 3 days. No sign of Thror. Okay, this is what happened to Thror during that time. Azog and the orcs are totally inhabiting Moria this time. When Thror walks in, they capture him and they torture him for 2 days. Finally, he gives up the information that he's got one of his followers, Nar, is waiting for him outside the Eastern Gate. So Azog comes out to the gate. This is all told from Nar's point of view, by the way. So if Nar is completely lying, then so be it. But this is the tale we tell. We'll take him at his word that this actually happened. So Azog comes to the gate. He says, I'm the king of Khazad-dûm now. Here's your leader. He has the severed head of Thror, and he has carved Azog into his head. So basically just defaced the head of the king. He says he's not going to kill Nar because he wants Nar to go back and tell him that the orcs have their homeland. And he throws this pouch of money at Nar. It's like some nominal fee, but it's some, whatever. A couple of coppers. Throws him a pouch of money, tells him to get out. But he can't take the head with him. So Nar leaves. He says as he walks away, he looks over his shoulder, and the orcs have come out the gate, and they've taken Thror's body, and they're ripping it to pieces and feeding it to crows. And it's just a horrible, obviously, insult and humiliation to the Dwarven people, and this terrible thing they did to the king. Nar goes back, tells Thrain this story. Oh my God, horrible thing just happened. Upon hearing that, Thrain goes into like a 7-day depression. He just won't talk, pulls out his beard, and basically at the end of that 7 days, he says, "This cannot be born," something like that. And this is what starts the war between orcs and dwarves. The war of the orcs and dwarves starts on that 7th day after hearing the news. So, Thrain II, now the king's dead, former king, long live the king, sends for all the different clans. They start this war. They're going to go back and they're going to take Moria back. And it takes a while, right? Anyway, it's like 9 years later that the actual battle of Azanul Bazaar happens. I talk a little bit about that as well in that Balrog bit, because flash forward, dwarves win this battle. Azog is killed, unlike in the movies where he's injured. He's actually killed in that battle. And Thrain survives, as does Dane and Thorin. But a lot of dwarves are killed off. But instead of taking Moria back, Dane steps in to Moria, senses something to Balrog, says, "You know what? We should not stay here." And so the dwarves withdraw, even though they had won, defeated the orcs very soundly. They do not stay in Moria, so they withdraw. Thrain still has the ring, still got the key, still got the map. They do not stay in Moria. They retreat to the Blue Mountains. And for about 50 years, they stay there and start to, kind of go up again. They're not in the amount of poverty they were before. Life is a little bit better for the people. And they reach a point where Thrain decides maybe it's time to go back and reclaim the Lonely Mountain. We tried Moria. There's a Balrog there. let's try Lonely Mountain. Maybe Smaug isn't there anymore. I don't know what he's hoping, but he's thinking maybe with this key and this map, maybe I can get us into Lonely Mountain. So he takes Balin and Dwalin and a couple other folks, and they set off. I suppose they were on a direct route to Lonely Mountain, but they never make it. Somewhere around Mirkwood, everybody goes to sleep one night. Balin, Dwalin, and everybody. They wake up, Thrain's gone. Turns out Thrain has been captured by Sauron's forces and taken to the nearby fortress of Dol Guldur. He is kept there for 9 years, I guess. It's 9 years before Gandalf ends up finding him. So yes, he's there for 9 years. He's tortured. Somehow, he does not give up the key and the map. I don't know how he hid the key and the map in Dol Guldur in a prison or a pit or wherever he was for that amount of time. But let's best not think about how he hid those things. Let's just not dwell on that. But somehow he kept those things hidden, because 9 years later, when Gandalf does a recon mission into Dol Guldur, he's just saying like, oh, this necromancer's coming back, and I don't like the fact that Sauron... Anyway, he's kind of checking up on Sauron. He breaks into Dol Guldur, and he finds a dying Thrain. Now, some of this stuff is covered in the extended edition of the Hobbit movies. They have a version of Thrain in some of the scenes. He was kind of gone crazy, and it's their version of it. It's not quite the way that happened, but it's a take on it, which is interesting. Any case, Gandalf finds Thrain. Thrain gives him the key and the map. Says to give these objects to his son. The ring is not on him at that point, because the ring was taken from him by Sauron in this time where he was tortured. Hence, when Sauron is making this offer to Dane, he's got 3 rings. One of those 3 rings was the one that Thrain was wearing. So Sauron's got that. He got the ring, did not get the key and the map somehow, but so be it. So anyway, the important thing is, as he's dying, he's so withered and at death's door, he doesn't even remember his own name. And so, while maybe Gandalf could suspect who he might be, he doesn't actually know whether this is Thrain or not, or just crazy old man that he met in Dol Guldur who died. But he does keep the key and the map, and it's years later, he has this run-in with Thorin, and he realizes, you're the son. You're the son I'm supposed to give these items to that I've been carrying around for however many years. And so he kind of puts 2 and 2 together. That's what starts, obviously, the final trip to Lonely Mountain, or the one that is successful. So that's kind of how the Line of Durin plugs along for a while until they are able to reclaim their homeland. And it is kind of cool, actually. This is the last thing I'll say on it. So the War of the Ring happens. Third Age ends. And we don't see a lot of the dwarves. The dwarves had this major battle, the Battle of Dale, back at Erebor, and there were many dwarves died, but they took out a bunch of Easterlings. So like 100,000 Easterlings were fighting at a spot that was not at the Black Gate or Gondor, because they were being distracted by these dwarven forces. So the dwarves had a big part to play in the success of keeping Sauron's forces at bay long enough for Frodo to drop the ring, or Gollum to fall with the ring into Mount Doom. But it's not covered that much, but that was their part in it. The dwarves were doing their part. In any case, in the appendices of the Lord of the Rings, it does say that after the War of the Ring, Third Age ends, we're now in the Fourth Age. Aragorn's king, and we talked about the Scouring the Shire that had ended. So the Shire's back to its glory and all that kind of stuff. There is a Durin the Seventh. He's basically the grandson of Dane, who was the guy that took over after Thorin died. Anyway, Durin the Seventh goes back and reclaims Khazad-dûm, and the dwarves live there for some indefinite amount of time in peace and harmony. And so the Line of Durin does survive, and they reclaim Moria for their, Khazad-dûm for their home, which I thought was kind of a cool little resolution to the trials and tribulations of the Line of Durin. And so there you go. That's what we know about the 7 Dwarven Rings and the Line of Durin. Hope you enjoyed this. If you've got a topic that you would like me to talk about in these Dork Lord of the Rings segments, feel free to put it in the comments. I'd be happy to talk about a topic of your choosing. I think that's it, everybody. Thanks a lot. Bye now.